What's up, everyone? Today is a great day for Joe and I because it's our first episode with our rebranding of the Crypto Mavericks podcast, and we could not have a better guest to share this event with us. It's Ben James, who's the founder of 404, and it's a Web3 platform that's revolutionizing 3D content by empowering users to build virtual worlds, games, utilizing AR, VR, XR experiences. And the best part is, without much, if any, technical experience at all. Ben, really happy to have you on the podcast today. And really, thanks for joining us for episode one of the Crypto Mavericks.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, we were just catching up a little bit. I know you are in Colorado for ETH Denver. Exciting stuff. I'll probably run into you down there, but it's always one of the better conferences. How's it treating you so far?
Yeah, it's pretty wild. There's a lot of decentralized AI stuff going on here, which is our bread and butter. So that's particularly interesting to me. But also, I didn't realize what a big conference this is. This is the first year I've been, and there's a lot of pretty interesting stuff being built at the moment. So it's cool.
Yeah, it's a banging conference, and it's not even just all ETH. And I realized that
Oh yeah, definitely.
one of my first times coming here, I thought this was everything. We were just going to talk about Ethereum the entire time. I see people down there talking and pushing, I shouldn't say pushing, talking and educating us on Bitcoin products, Solana products. I was like, it's just overall a great conference, and I'm definitely excited to meet some people and explore. But before we get started, we want to talk a lot about 404. I know you're doing some killer stuff with the platform. I'd love to know a little bit about your background and how you got into the crazy world of Web3.
Yeah, thanks. So my background, I'm here in Denver, although usually we're sat in Austria because I'm fortunate enough to have US, UK, and Italian citizenship. So I've really bounced around a lot of my life, and I think in a way, that's influenced that I've really found some enjoyment in new experiences and even design to some extent. I'm trained as an architect, so I have a master's degree in architecture. I'm a self-taught coder. And in the US, I went to the Keenan Flagler Business School. So I've got these three kind of weird components of my background, a bit of tech, a bit of art and design, and a bit of business background. I was doing a lot of interesting projects before I started 404, really working at the intersection of design and tech. Worked on an F1 track, was pretty cool. Used the telemetry data of the
Nice.
cars, viewing angles of the camera to help inform those design decisions. And then I started doing a lot of work in the XR space, AR, VR kind of stuff. And this was pretty early for designers to be working in XR. And so I had to do a lot of that coding myself in using computer vision, machine vision. And I had this idea that maybe you could connect machine vision with machine learning in an interesting way. This is a couple of years ago. This pre-Midjourney, pre-Chat GPT, prototyped up a small architecture generator where you could generate buildings, and thought, okay, this is pretty interesting. Sought some funding from the European Union. We actually got funded. The first funding we got came from the EU to build out trustworthy AI applications within practice. And this again before Gen AI is anything mainstream whatsoever. And so we started building that out, and I love the tech that we've built, and it's all oriented around building 3D objects, 3D environments, 3D virtual worlds. And we started going down that path, and we still work with some really large names within Web 2. So we work with people like Square Enix, for example, right? Like kind of some of these like gaming giants. And then for me, the moment that brought me to blockchain was the goal of the company as it evolved and formed, and we raised venture and started to look at, like, what's the broader vision here for what this technology can do. Is it was always around, like, could you democratize content creation in some way? Like, could you lower the barriers to entry for incredibly creative people to make these worlds that are otherwise prohibitively expensive, prohibitively time consuming, require specialized skill sets. And within that, guys, actually Web3 and blockchain and decentralized AI, I felt those were the pieces that could come together in a really interesting way to make that a reality. And so that's what birthed 404. It was our kind of secret project for a while, which is where the name comes from. So it's the error message you get on a computer when you can't find a website because we were building this thing out in stealth. And yeah, we launched it last year as a subnet on BitTensor. So we're subnet 17 on BitTensor. And it's basically run through decentralized AI. We're helping to anybody can go on, describe what they're looking for, and generate 3D models. Yeah, and put those into virtual worlds.
I love that. What a well-rounded background, to be honest with you. And that's the unique thing. Whenever we talk about with people in Web3, we run into people that are just like they had a career that was
Yeah,
completely different. They discover, something within Web3 or a use case, and they're just trying to improve it at the end of the
yeah.
day.
Well, I really like, I mean, you see it here even at ETH Denver. You see how many builders are in this space. And I think that's really interesting because like, sometimes Web3 it feels so cutting edge for us. So, we're developing this tech, right? While at the same time going to market, exploring use cases and innovating on the underlying foundational tech. And somebody described it once as building the car while you're driving it on the highway. And I like that. And I think that's probably not just true of our project, that's true of a lot of Web3 builders. You're here at the cutting edge and you're trying to do this as fast as possible. And to do that, you need to kind of go for it. And that's really cool.
I 100%, sorry, Joe, I 100% am going to steal that line and probably not give credit to whoever said it, but that is excellent. Joe, go ahead, man.
No, no, great line, great. I was thinking about stealing it also. I mean, so many questions for you. First off, what's your favorite F1 team?
Oh man, I mean, this is a controversial question, I mean, I must say I do like Ferrari, and I'm pretty excited to see what Lewis is going to do this year. The preseason testing is starting tonight our time, so yeah, let's see.
That's amazing. I imagine you could bring a lot of the work they do now back to the F1 and help them in terms of training and whatnot. I'm sure the application is very useful there. And that brings me to my question. So where do you talked about working with Square Enix. I love Final Fantasy. Where do you see your application most utilized? Or is it one
Yeah.
sector or is it encompassing of everything? Because we know that there's like companies like Meta, they're trying to bring everyone onto that 3D VR AR that you mentioned in terms of hardware. Where do you guys see you fit best?
Yeah, it's interesting. So, I think as we've developed, there was an immediately a pull from the gaming industry. So I think the gaming is a good beachhead kind of market for the applications that we're building. I remember one game developer. This was really early on when we were developing the tech and kind of we were talking to film VFX, we were talking to architects and urban planners as well. So in the built world, talking to game developers. And this was when now just to be clear, now our tech kind of generates really anything you can imagine and describe. But at that time, it was still this kind of architecture generator. And the game developer that I was speaking with told me, we design more architecture in a single game than an architecture office does in 10 years. And we're not trained as game developer, as architects, right? So I think what it signaled to me is that the gaming industry is massive. I mean, it's something like a $300 billion industry or something like that, and they're building out massive virtual worlds that have the need for hundreds of thousands of unique 3D models and gameplay mechanics in that. But that said, you know, I myself am probably partial to some of the other creative fields that this goes into. So we've seen use cases in film VFX is another kind of common one. And I think even sort of the broader consumer use cases are pretty interesting here, right? So people that want to use 3D content on websites, that want to use this for product and fashion iterative design. And I think where it will go eventually, I hope, is even into things like digital twins, like the F1 comparison is not off base, right? You know, there's a lot of potential use cases that could be done there. But I think the fundamental idea for us is that if you give this technology to people who are inherently creative, they'll find really great things to do with it. Because right now the bottleneck of content creation is simply that you have to rely on a relatively small set of people with a specialized skill set in modeling and texturing these things in order to unlock any of those potentials. And so if you change that dynamic and all of a sudden anybody can create these virtual worlds or digital assets, yeah, you have a lot of different possibilities to go from.
I never really thought about it when you're building these virtual worlds, how architecture plays such a key point into, developing the world you want, and for gamers to, or
Yeah.
anybody going into these virtual worlds want to engage with that.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember here. I think one of the earlier proof points we had when we were a bit focused on architecture was GTA 5 cost something like $250 million, and that's a largely sort of an urban world game. The leaked budget for GTA 6 is $2 billion, which is larger than the GDP, the most GDP of the countries. So yeah, I mean it's just flagging the scale of some of these games is massive. And then you'd expect, right? The way this industry is shifting is your compute is getting stronger, right? So users are starting to expect higher fidelity, more detailed, larger maps, right? That's just where consumer demand is going because compute is enabling that. And then at the same time, you have people like you know, Joe, like Meta that are pushing XR, AR, VR experiences. So new classes of virtual world building. And yeah, and so I think we're really excited by just the industry as a whole because you basically have a couple of forces coming together that is going to push a lot of demand into an area where there's bottleneck in the creation side of stuff.
Yeah, I just used it. Yesterday, I'm trying to buy a closet through IKEA, and they have
Yeah,
this 3D modeling of placing it. I'm like, this is very useful. I really like this.
yeah,
I had a more general question because NVIDIA is kind of leading the space, right? They built their own Omniverse platform of their
yes.
own programming language. How does that fit in, or kind of, direct, builders like yourself? Are you taking bits and pieces from that? I'm just curious because they're such a powerful platform, and they're training robotics on there. They're training,
Yeah,
different things. As a person who doesn't understand its world, I
yeah.
just kind of want to see how that, plays into what you're building.
Yeah, so I mean, Omniverse is a really interesting example. They are doing a lot of work with digital twins in Omniverse, which is kind of a specific niche of 3D content creation where you really need to have a one-to-one mapping of the real world around you to do, for example, simulation work, compared to something like maybe a game environment where you want more sort of creative and stylized. You don't necessarily want to mirror the real world around you. You want to sort of
Mhm.
reflect your inherent creativity in that. But I think the broader question is quite interesting because like obviously big tech is building in this space, right? They also see the need for these types of virtual worlds. I think one of the things that I like a lot about our project that is in my opinion quite significant is the decentralized nature of it versus sort of the centralized approach that would come from an NVIDIA or Meta. Um, and for me, the kind of the easy comparison here. So to give a little bit of context for how this type of tech works with us at 404 is we have a subnet on BitTensor, which means there's anytime a request comes in, you wanna generate a 3D model of a character, for example. That request is going to be done in a competition model by different miners around the world, usually some form of people with AI research knowledge, or they might be kind of generalists who can optimize compute in a clever way, all running different open source models that they've built on top of to do that. It means in practice that if there's some innovation that happens within the broader industry, I'm not talking about a new foundational 3D model, even just something like a small piece of code that becomes open source that allows you to increase the fidelity of a texture or something like this. We see that because you have this decentralized intelligence, somebody will find that within a matter of hours or days, integrate that into their 3D generative process, and already be returning those results to customers within that time frame. That's shocking in this kind of industry where a centralized repository would one take longer to identify that change had happened, and then two, once they did, have to sort of systematically go through, retrain and check and do all of these other processes. And that's why I think, that's why you get this impression in Web3 that you're really kind of, yeah, like I said, building this car while you're driving it on the highway, right? And there's downsides to that, but there's also massive upsides to that. And I think, that doesn't even touch on all the sort of dangers potentially of giving some really powerful technology like this to one or two or a handful of large tech companies. But I think that to me is like a really nice point of distinction here, and where Web3 really enables that, right? That's You're able to have that decentralization because you can do things like track ownership and authenticity on chain, right? Like this is kind of a combination of technologies that came together and work in a really nice way to enable that.
I mean, we're all in crypto. We love decentralization and the
Yeah,
term, and it makes just a ton of sense to us in so many different avenues.
yeah,
If that's AI, if that's gaming, and we hear a lot being thrown around. Really, well, gaming over the past few years, and it's catching steam again. And AI, it feels like it's been catching a ton of steam.
yeah,
Headlines, if that's in the Web 2 world, if that's in the Web 3 world. And the space just moves so fast. It's it's almost hard to keep up on like where the next momentum's going to be, what the
yeah.
next product or protocol is going to be, and what at the end of the day the users are going to want. Kind of zooming out a little bit, I'd love to know like your overall thoughts of just the macro crypto market, and then second to that, really where you think AI and gaming is going to go.
Yeah. I mean, I come at this from a perspective of somebody that started building in the Web 2 space before kind of seeing some of this stuff and jumping into Web 3. So I'm always on the lookout for, you know, products or tech or projects that have some form of escape velocity beyond Web 3 as well. And I think actually gaming that you bring up is a really good example of that, because I think the first iteration of Web 3 gaming some couple of years ago, I think was too focused on the tech itself, right? Led to arguably not the nicest gameplay experiences in some cases, but like a very clever form of financialization and interoperability that had real merit and value, but couldn't necessarily be recognized because of some of the underlying, gameplay mechanics and aesthetics and overall composition of these games. So I think for me, the interesting thing is, can we build products, applications, technologies that benefit from all of those things that we love, decentralization and being able to sort of trace ownership, authenticity, all of this, right? But do so in a way that doesn't make that the only focus, right? Like, this is like a nice chat, but if it were like a pitch to a game developer, right? I wouldn't be talking about decentralization. I wouldn't be talking about blockchain. I would just be talking about that they're going to get the most insanely aesthetic, high quality assets that they've ever seen within a few seconds because of the technology that we've built up. And if they want to get into the technology and how it works, I love it. That's something I'm very passionate about. But I think stuff like that, that idea of escape velocity beyond Web 3 and crypto generally is something that I think is very powerful. And at the same time, I think I'm pretty optimistic for the overall macro side of crypto. Living over in Europe, I'm not as close to some of the day-to-day stuff here happening in the US, but I think there was a lot of excitement, coming into sort of the new administration, and I hope that we'll see that manifest itself, because I think we've seen firsthand sometimes as we try to register with exchanges and stuff like this how difficult it can be because of some existing regulations that appear to be loosening, and I think that's really a positive sign.
What's been the biggest learning lesson or feedback that you gotten? It seems like you've generated a lot. It says, is it over 15 million model data sets that you guys created so far? Has
Yeah,
there been
so
any
this is
hiccups or anything? Because, there's, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so of course, I think this has been a wild ride for us. I think one of the things we've sort of often had to learn is what's the balance between speed of generation and quality, because the two are related in a somewhat adversarial way, right? So we could return a model in 6 seconds or 5 seconds, right? Or less. But to do that, you're gonna impact some of the quality mechanisms that you're able to return in that short period of time. That may be good for some game use cases, right? Like real-time user-generated content happening in game, right? So imagine you're in a world builder, and as you're describing the types of worlds that you want to build, or the types of objects you want to build in that world while you're playing that game, you're going to want that to be a very real-time generative process, and you can put in place a couple of things to then up-res them as time goes on. Versus you're in the prototyping phase or you're concepting, you're going to really want to just see what's the best quality that I can achieve here. Like what is that look and feel going to be like, so that I can get the A/B testing down correctly. And so I think what we've realized is that different parts of the creative process here, not just in gaming, but in sort of all sort of these creative fields like film and VFX as well, require different kind of specifications of the models that you're gonna get out. And I think the other thing that ties to then is who your who your audience is in that stage really makes a big difference, because we usually deal with the people who use our tech are creatives, which is amazing. And I think the goal then is to make it very clear to them that this is just a way to augment your own creativity, right? This is not trying to and can't replace you as a creative. Yeah, this is not a technology that is going to be automatically making games with no human involved. This is going to be something that you can use to make better games, more creative games, make them faster, go to market sooner. I think even one of the reasons this comes up is, like, very early on when I was developing the tech, one of the first things that hit me is, as an architect, I was doing these architecture competitions. So you'd have about 2 weeks sometimes to submit the concept design for a building, a museum somewhere, and you'd have 100 like really cool ideas. It could be kind of twisty and or more fluid form, but I would also like to see kind of like something a little bit more conventional and boxy and try out different material setups. But you didn't have time. I mean, there was no way to do that. So you had to take your pick, maybe mock up one or two of them, and then just go for whatever showed early traction. But with this technology, you don't really need to do that, right? You can explore, you can ideate, you can even have the AI learn your preferences a little bit there, right? Like, okay, this is the style that I'm really building into this game, and yeah, stuff like this is very interesting.
I had a question about the decentralization part of it, and maybe you don't know the answer because you're not as technical, and hopefully I'm asking it correctly. So having ownership is a big part of Web3, right? Where does this live? Because there's a lot of talk about on-chain, off-chain. If I generate a 3D artwork, is it hosted on BitTensor through the decentralization? Because that's a very big question for a lot of people. That's once on-chain property.
Yeah, so we're still pretty early in this aspect. So the way we've dealt with it is, if you generate a 3D model, like you get that 3D model. You get that 3D model in a file format that also can be taken off-chain if you want. But we do record who generated that 3D model for you, who validated that 3D model for you. And they even sort of sign digital handshakes to that effect to record that data on chain. Now, we don't yet have like clever use cases for how do we sort of programmatically reward the creators of these models. I mean, they are rewarded for their performance already through the ecosystem. But I do think that's an area where we'd like to build out in the future. And the reason we record all of this data is simply to give us the opportunity to do that when the time comes. Because I think when you deal with kind of this new experimental technology like we're building, on the one hand, you just want mass adoption. You just want people to use this. But at the same time, if somebody is successful, right, you want to share in that success, right? That a very successful game is the culmination of many different parts. And if you can track some of that ownership and authenticity through on-chain data, then you have really interesting opportunities to incentivize people to build successful games and worlds.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head on just how AI is making people overall just more efficient at the end of the day. And I'm a big believer in AI and utilizing it in everyday life more and more. And as that whole sector becomes more sophisticated and integrates with Web3 and crypto more and more, it makes me more interesting. And I'm also on the same side of like, this isn't going to replace the human element.
Right.
This is going to shelve the mundane tasks that we don't want to be dealing with for hours on end, and we can just really focus on the creative aspect.
Yeah, I agree 100% with that. And the other thing that I would say sometimes that gets missed is it's difficult to understand the profoundly creative impacts that this new medium is going to have. So for example, when television came out, I don't know if you guys know what the first kind of television shows were. I don't know if you know.
No idea.
It was somebody reading the radio, because that was like that was what they thought, oh, this new medium can do is we can show somebody reading the radio, right? And now, of course, that is blown up into a thousand different sort of creative iterations off of this. And I think that's where we're at with AI, right? So we're looking at AI in this lens a little bit, depending on how you may be affected by it, some skepticism or some trepidation. But what we sometimes don't realize is that I think when we look back 10 years, 5 years from now, and we're seeing the new types of worlds where you're moving through the game and it's morphing as you move and it's all tied to your personal preferences and you're getting sort of bespoke experiences, right? And 1,000 other things that I can't even fathom at this moment. I think that's what's really exciting about AI. And we see like through all of these technical progressions, that doesn't remove people from the process in any way, shape, or form. That changes kind of their role in the process, but usually frees them up to be, at least within the creative industries, more creative, doing more interesting stuff, embracing kind of new forms of visual representation. And I think that's what we're pretty excited about.
What would be your idealistic or maybe 5-year projection of how you want AI to impact, the world that you're building? Give us some pie in the sky, view of what utopian world vision that you have for it.
Well, I mean, I'm a big fan of XR. I've been for a long time, even before building this company. So, I think that kind of the merging of physical and digital worlds, or physical and virtual worlds, is going to happen, and I think that's going to be a very interesting thing to happen. My background as an architect says if we're going to merge these two types of worlds, things like form and space and aesthetics are really important here. Yeah, because you can do that in a terrible way where you're wearing glasses and you walk around and you see like 1,000 ads plastered on top of everything, or you can do it in a way that you get kind of new spatial experiences, you move through things, you get sort of to see objects that would never exist in reality because they're not confined by gravity or physics or things like this. And so my kind of utopia would be that is the world that we live in, and that it's built by the technology that we're developing. That this is the sort of thing where you say, if we're going to live in this kind of creative hybrid between physical and digital worlds, you're going to need so much more content. You're going to need so much more creative content. And then the bottleneck of established content creation pipelines, of this expertise of 3D modeling, that's gone. And you need to use a new technology to do that. And you need to just empower a bunch of people who are inherently very creative to make that. So that's what we're trying to build. And that's my utopia.
I'm just getting killer tidbits from this interview. I had no idea that the first TV show was somebody just reading the radio on TV. I'm definitely gonna use that, but that's such a good an analogy, or just a look in the past of how we evolved to podcasts, live streaming, TV shows, streaming. I don't know. Not really a question, just kind of an amazing tidbit. I appreciate you sharing with me. Well, what's going to happen to these like major gaming studios? I know they have more money than God. They're backed by major people out there. Are they going to be forced to embrace AI and decentralization?
I think it's going to come down to they are both. There's an interesting dichotomy. At the one hand, they are the most at risk from this technology because now anybody can compete with them, right? At the other hand, they arguably are in the best spot to benefit from this technology. They have the data, right? If they have thousands or hundreds of thousands of gameplay hours and mechanics and 3D models and 2D images. So my pitch to them often is, you can either embrace this or ignore this. And if you ignore this, you're not really giving advantage to your head start here for what you already have, right? Because if you embrace it, you can take all of that data and you can go and sort of turn that head start into another leap forward, right? Another sort of area of defensibility that maybe some of these other guys don't have coming up. But big companies are slow to move and they're skeptical of change. And I think you would see that a scrappy 3 to 10 person studio that really embraces AI is going to make games that are the same size of those worlds, the same visual fidelity, the same, incredibly diverse narrative aspects. And then, at that point, that head start that these big studios have is not going to really be that applicable anymore. So it's up to them. It's going to be a tough decision. And I think, we talk to a lot of the large AAA studios, and some are excited by it, some are embracing it, and some are very skeptical.
I'm going to bring it back to an older question, and I hate to call you the oracle of gaming because you're not, right? But a lot of gaming questions, and it will pertain to kind of what you guys are building. But where do you see that going? It could be gaming or entertainment, but more gaming in specific, even though you're not the true expert there. I see a lot of sandbox VRs popping up everywhere. Yeah. There's a lot of smaller gaming types of, play that, like, Japan has like crazy arcade games. I'm not sure if you noticed. They got physical merged with actual games. Like, where is gaming going overall? in general? Is it, a mixed combination of that, or is it going to be smaller experiences, at-home experiences? So that's the first question there. And kind of where do you see the most opportunity, whether it be, in that sector of gaming or somewhere else?
Yeah, I it's obviously very difficult to say. One of the things that I'm excited by in gaming is probably the element where games are adding in UGC. So that can like user generated content. So that can be like you were talking about kind of these sandbox VR games. But I think if you sort of expand that into somebody's developed some core IP that you can build off of, right? Like I think we've seen Fortnite as being an incredibly successful example of this. If you give somebody a blank canvas and ask them to build, can be a little bit daunting for somebody, right? Because you don't really know where to start. If you give somebody some starting point in the form of IP, in the form of a visual language, in the form of an existing sort of game that needs sort of now to be built out over future content drops, I think then all of a sudden people get really creative. And I think now you have the sort of, and this is kind of, where the modding community has come right from years, but all of a sudden you have technology that can enable. Right now, modding can be kind of difficult. You need to be a fairly technical and an advanced person to mod. So if all of a sudden you lower that barrier to entry, I think the reason that UGC is particularly important is it gives you sort of more personal attachment to the game that you're building, right? Like I'm not talking about sort of anything on chain ownership, but I'm talking about just emotional ownership that you had a shape in this game that you were building, and it gives you sort of more of like an attention to it, right? And I think oftentimes these games are really fighting for attention amongst players because there's so many interesting things out there that you wanna do. And so if you can get up your one-up edge on that, that goes a long way. So yeah, to me that's some of the content that I'm really excited about are things like user-generated content, user-generated worlds, all of this stuff. Yeah. And then
Looking
the
ahead,
second question,
oh.
sorry. Then your second question was just about, I think, sorry, was it like gaming in general, kind of like the move between like the physical gaming and the virtual gaming, like
Yeah, it was where do you see the most opportunity for growth, whether it
right.
be in gaming or another sector?
Yeah, so I think with that premise that I see kind of things like users generating their games and their content, then I see sort of a lot of the growth in any kind of sector that's going to enable that. So that's certain categories of games. So typically kind of large open world games where you're going to want to use sort of user and users to populate those worlds. I think also the AR, VR, XR stuff is pretty interesting because a lot of the content you want to put into your world is going to be a little bit specific to you since it's going to be based on your specific surroundings in that kind of, mixed realities environment. Yeah.
Looking ahead, what's one thing you hope for achieves by the end of, let's say, 2025, where you kind of have this moment of like, we did it, guys. We made it happen.
So I think this year for us is going to be very interesting. We have spent a lot of time and effort and resources building this technology, and we feel in a pretty good space for this tech. So I think this is going to be the year that we start to scale. And for us, that means some big partnerships. That means some pretty massive integrations to increase like our users and our adoption. And I think the other thing that probably does is introduces like a few people that have published, huge, interesting worlds and experiences with our technology. The showcasing that, yes, I was somebody who was creative, but I didn't really know how to model or texture things. But I used the tech and I made something incredibly aesthetically compelling, interesting, attracted thousands or hundreds of thousands of people to play it. And I'm also pretty confident that is what we are going to see released this year with our tech. So,
What are some of the partnerships and collaborations you just mentioned? Would love to know a little bit about that.
yeah. So I'm not such at liberty to say some of them at the moment, but I will say that they are both in Web3 and also some really big Web2 ones. And I think that's really cool for us when we're able to announce that. And it should be here within the next couple of weeks. So maybe I ping you with a like a quick 5-minute conversation to drop some huge names, but I can't say them at the moment. Yeah.
Just tell Brian that ETH Denver.
Yeah, that when the camera's off, exactly.
I do love some alpha, but what you're building seems you're just so well rounded. You obviously know the space extremely well, and it's just really exciting to see what you're building at 404. I want to give you an opportunity for anybody that can find you or learn more about 404, give a little shout out for the audience.
Yeah, thanks. So I think, we're already at the stage anybody can come and test this out. You don't need to be an expert content creator. So our website is 404.xyz. You'll see examples of some of the worlds that people have created. You'll be able to test out some of the generators yourselves. You can also find us on BitTensor as subnet 17. So that's another good place to get some alpha on some of the stuff we're building, especially if you want to deep dive on some of the aspects of decentralization that happen there. And anybody is always free to reach out to me. You can find, I think, me very easily through the website, through our contact page. So
Awesome. And just for the audience, I'll put all those links down below so
awesome.
you can find 404, you can buy, you can find Ben, and you can definitely chirp him with whatever you think he should improve or add on.
Please do. Please do. We're building in public here. So if you think something needs to be better, tell me directly.
Awesome. Ben, really appreciate you jumping on the podcast today. It was a lot of fun.
Thank you guys. I had a blast.